Okay, usually when we talk about a video game character just completely bombing with the audience, it's because of something technical, right? Like really bad voice acting, or maybe a glitchy character model, or just, boring wooden dialogue. But today, well, we are looking at Grace Ashcroft from Resident Evil Requiem. And the core problem with Grace isn't just bad writing, it is what the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre would call bad faith, a fundamental denial of human freedom. On paper, I mean, if you just read her bio, Grace Ashcroft sounds incredible. She's an FBI intelligence analyst. She's the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, the reporter who survived the original Raccoon City incident. You would think she would be an absolute powerhouse, but the reality of the gameplay tells a completely different story. She's just exhausting, stuttering and whimpering from start to finish. And this is really where that massive disconnect begins. We have a character labeled as an FBI analyst. That title it carries very specific expectations of competence. Now, let me play devil's advocate for just a second here. She's an analyst, right? Not a field agent. Maybe she's just good with computers and terrible with guns. Is it really fair for players to expect her to be John Wick? Well, that is a fair question, but even if you are just an analyst, you go through about 20 weeks of training at Quantico. It is not just taking coding classes. It involves rigorous psychological evaluations, stress tests, firearms training, and deep background checks. To get the security clearance necessary to be an FBI analyst, you need rock solid judgment. You have to demonstrate stability under extreme pressure, which she does not at all. I mean, in the game, Grace is living classified terminals unlocked. She leaves case files scattered on her desk. That is a massive IT and security failure. It is a huge breach of what we call the suspension of disbelief. If the writers tells us she is a federal agent, but she behaves like someone who has never heard of basic security protocol, we have an incoherence. The label they gave her just doesn't match the object we see on screen. And it's not just the paperwork or the computers either. It is the physical gameplay. Grace is constantly stumbling. She hyperventilates in dangerous situations instead of actually using her brain to get out of them, like some clumsy anime trope. Which brings us to the first big philosophical problem here. The writers are clearly trying to sell us a realistic depiction of trauma. They want us to feel her fear, but they've done it by stripping the character of her agency. They made her helpless to the point where she ceases to be a believable subject. But again, she saw her mother murdered at the Wrenwood Hotel 8 years ago. That is her backstory. If I saw that and then zombies started showing up at my office, well, I would probably be hyperventilating too. Isn't that just a realistic human response? It is a realistic behavior for a victim, but is it realistic for a protagonist? Or even just a functioning adult in federal law enforcement? This is where we really need to bring in Jean-Paul Sartre. I found a dissertation on embodied consciousness, and it tackles this exact issue. So, how does a 20th century French philosopher explain what is wrong with a video game character? Well, it starts with the body. Sartre argues that we are radically free. Now, that doesn't mean we can fly or walk through walls. It means we are fundamentally free to choose how we react to our situation. He calls the body and our past trauma a situation. Your past, your physical limitations, your trauma, that is your facticity. You did not choose it. Grace did not choose to see her mother die. That is simply a fact of her life. Those are the cards she was dealt. But Sartre says that while we cannot choose our facticity, we are absolutely free to choose our attitude toward it. We have these powers of transcendence. We can act despite our trauma. So the main critique here is that the game writers don't let her do that. The writers have fallen into determinism. They seem to believe that because Grace witnessed a murder, she must be a stumbling, hyperventilating wreck. They treat her trauma as a set path that dictates her every move rather than a hurdle she has to navigate. By making her purely a victim of her past, they are denying her transcendence. It is the difference between having a heavy backpack full of rocks and just being buried under a pile of rocks. A Sartrean subject carries the backpack. Grace is just buried. Think about Clarice Starling from The Silence of the Lambs. This is a great example. She's a trainee, she's deeply traumatized by her childhood, she's terrified of Buffalo Bill, but does she sit in the corner and whimper when things get dark? No, she is visibly shaking, but she keeps her gun up and walks into the dark basement anyway. She uses her fear to focus. That is transcendence. Clarice accepts her situation and she chooses to act anyway. Grace, by contrast, is portrayed as having no agency. Sartre would call her an object rather than a subject. It just reduces a woman to a stereotype. And honestly, it gets so much worse when you look at the plot. We have to talk about the Elpis storyline in Requiem. This is where the writing moves from just bad characterization to what Sartre specifically calls bad fate. Grace isn't just Alyssa's daughter. It turns out she was adopted by Spencer, Oswald E. Spencer, the founder of Umbrella, the guy who basically started the entire franchise's nightmare, which is, an incredibly bold choice for the writers to make. Apparently, Grace was his weakness. He genuinely loved her. And get this, Grace carries something called Elpis in her DNA. The villains think it is a new virus, but it is actually a cure. It is an antivirus. It is the chosen one trope all over again. There's even a clone of Grace named Emily who is considered a failure because she doesn't have it. I mean, why does every character have to be special or chosen? It feels like the recent Star Wars movies. And this is the exact definition of bad faith. Wait, you might ask, that term is usually used in like political arguments. What does bad faith actually mean for a fictional character? Let me give you Sartre's classic analogy. He uses the example of a waiter in a cafe. Imagine a waiter who is moving a little too mechanically. His voice is a little too eager to please. He is balancing his tray with this exaggerated robotic care. He is playing the role of the waiter so hard that he's trying to disappear into it, like he's an NPC in his own life. Exactly. He's deceiving himself into thinking he's a thing, an object, a waiter, rather than a free human being who just happens to be holding a tray at this moment. That is bad faith. Deceiving yourself into thinking you are an object with no choice to escape the heavy burden of freedom. So, how does the narrative force Grace into bad fate? The game narrative itself is in bad fate. It reduces Grace from a person who makes choices into a biological object. It tells her she is the cure, she is Spencer's favorite, she is the magic blood. The writers are saying her value isn't in her intellect or her bravery. Her value is strictly biological. She's basically a walking test tube. Sartre argues that biology is just a fact. It has no inherent meaning until we give it one. But the game tries to make her biology her entire destiny, completely stripping her of the human need to make choices. It feels incredibly lazy. Instead of writing a character who has to work hard or use her analyst skills to solve the mystery, they just say, oh, the answer is literally inside her blood. She doesn't have to do anything. She just has to be. It is lazy and it's dehumanizing. Compare this to someone like Jill Valentine. Jill is a hero because of what she does. Grace, heroism, is a biological condition. Speaking of action, or well, lack of action, I want to circle back to the gameplay mechanics. The stumbling, the falling over constantly. This links to a very specific concept called the look. This is one of Sartre's most famous and unsettling ideas. What is the look? Imagine you are alone in your room. You are singing, you are dancing, doing something a bit silly. You feel totally free. You are the center of your own universe. Now imagine you look up and suddenly see a stranger watching you through the window. Ooh, immediate freeze, right? Total embarrassment. That sudden shame, that feeling of being frozen, that is the look. In that moment, you stop being the center of the world. You become an object in that stranger's world. You become a body for others. It is super uncomfortable. You feel totally exposed and judged. Sartre says, when we are looked at by another, we feel objectified. And he even defines sadism in this context as trying to reduce a free person to just their flesh, to just a body. So how does this tie into Grace? The game mechanics enforce this exact objectification. The player is forced to control Grace as she stumbles and hyperventilates. So as the player, I'm not really embodying Grace. I'm watching her fail. It is this weird fetishization of her clumsiness. Like the game is saying, look at the poor girl fall down. It creates a massive distance. You don't feel with her. You look at her. And it is a total flaw for a protagonist. Think about Rebecca Chambers from the older titles. Rebecca is a medic. She is only 18 in her first game. Very cerebral, but resourceful. She's physically weaker than the heavy hitters. That is her facticity. But she mixes chemicals. She solves puzzles. She treats wounds. She isn't designed to be insufferable and scared. Grace is designed to be an object of pity. And the contrast makes it so much worse when you look at the other characters in RE9. I mean, where is Grace during the high-octane battle with Hank? Leon is fighting for his life, and Grace, it just perfectly highlights her total lack of agency. She's a liability entirely defined by her fear and her special blood. So we have a character who is incoherent in her role as an FBI agent, biologically determined by a lazy plot twist and mechanically objectified by the gameplay. It is a trifecta of bad writing. It really is a complete failure to understand what makes a human being interesting to play. But let's try to be constructive here and think about the ending of the game. Forget for a moment that there is a bad ending, which fits the lore and Leon's story much better than the good one. We have talked about this already in a previous video. The good ending, from a Sartrean perspective, is actually deeply ironic. Why? Because it requires Grace to embrace the cure inside her. She effectively has to accept her situation, her biology, to save others. But how should she have been written? Constructively speaking, Grace should have started by accepting her facticity. Yes, she has a trauma. Yes, she lacks field combat experience, but instead of being paralyzed by it, she should have chosen to act anyway. So instead of the game making her hyperventilate and stumble, she should have leaned into her background. She is an intelligence analyst. Her project, to use Sartre's term, should have been intellectual. While Leon is fighting Hank, Grace should be using her intellect to hack the terminals, bypass security, and outsmart Zeno. That would have been amazing. You play Leon for the survival horror combat, and you play Grace for the cerebral puzzle solving. That would be a character exercising her freedom. She transcends her physical limitation through her intellect. And it would have made the good ending actually feel earned. She wouldn't just be a passive vessel for magic blood. She would be using her mind to figure out how to extract and release the cure. The reveal about her being Spencer's adopted daughter would have been a tragic obstacle she had to overcome, not her entire identity. She could have been a subject defining her own future, rather than a thing determined by the past. But instead, the writers failed to respect the character's freedom. Which brings us to the big takeaway here. Because Grace fails so spectacularly due to this incoherence between her role and her reality as a helpless victim, it's just frustrating. The medium of video games is entirely about agency. When you strip that away and force the player into bad fate, it breaks the core appeal of gaming. It really makes you think about this broader trend in media right now. We are seeing so many franchises become obsessed with deep lore, special bloodlines, or chosen ones. It's everywhere, and it leaves you with a really provocative thought to mull over. In this age of franchises obsessing over magic DNA, are we forgetting what actually makes a character compelling? It is not their genetics, it is the choices they make in the face of absolute terror. Biology is just a fact. The choice is what makes you human. Thank you, dear Cogitantes. Next time you boot up a survival horror game, ask yourself if your character is truly free or just a hostage to their own history. We'll see you next time. Happy gaming!